Hello everyone. So this video is going to be a tutorial mostly focusing on the assignments for this particular module, but I'm going to spend a few minutes on this one recording just explaining the pages before we get to the assignment. Okay. So this is just a general explanation as to why we sort of fell back or fell behind, and that's because of the timing between the two written assignments that you submitted to me 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, which I'm in the process of evaluating, which I did some last night, and I'll do some more tonight, today, and the rest of the week. Okay, and I just wanted to sort of provide like a rationale, and also just to sort of set up um, the rationale of how work outside of class is evaluated, not only for this class but generally for every other class that you take at Dominguez Hills, right? Because like at least for the face-to-face classes that I have, I've gone over this type of explanation in terms of the time needed to dedicate when you're in class per the unit hours that you're in class, meaning that like if you're taking this you're enrolled in this class, it is a 4 unit class, no, a 3 unit class. So then for every unit hour in class, that means that when you're out of class, you have to take you have to study at the very minimum 2 hours. All right, so for like a 3 unit class, that would be 6 hours, and for a 4 unit class, that would be 8 hours, and then for the 5 hour unit classes, which have lab, would be about 10 hours a week. And that's just the minimum, right? Because if you actually wanted to dedicate more time to a particular class, the way you could break it down is just add an extra hour. All right. So if you're taking a 3 unit class, you would be dedicating about 12 hours a week. If it's basically you get the idea, right? Because there's a similar thing that professors do when we prepare for a class, and what I tend to do is for every 1 hour I'm in class, I spend about like 3 hours or so preparing for that 1 hour discussion, right? So it's just to sort of give you a general overview of how work outside of class is organized. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And now I'm going to go to the next slide. And the next slide is just summarizing, or sorry, the use of literature, right? And I'm here. I'm just sort of explaining what the literature review is for, and how we tend to go about it. And then I just provided an example of how these literature reviews can be used. So I'll just read through this. All right. So the idea of the literature review is to look for relevant sources to help you frame a topic and develop theoretical and methodological issues and questions. The first level of understanding is to identify what issue is being dealt with within a research project and what identifiable elements are foundational for a research project. And I call this, or I tend to call this, the object of study. I had you do this when I asked you to identify elements of an article by Amy Williams, or an article by Amy Williams, sorry, article on Hurricane Milton. And that was sort of getting you a bit of exposure of how to use the research cycle to begin to identify elements for a research project. Okay, because that's really important, right? Because if I remember correctly, when I did that for the discussion on Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene, um, and I talked about the issue of race and the issue of misinformation, and a couple of other elements that I don't recall at the moment. But as you're reading the article, you can start beginning or begin to identify what part of that story you want to focus on, right? And that's sort of what I would call delimiting the focus of the research, or just means that you're just focusing your research to a particular element or aspect of a much larger social phenomenon. Okay. All right. So when a student begins to collect their literature review, the choices made can inform readers of the allegiance of a writer. For instance, if your values are anti-racist, and the reason it is, as an intellectual project, is that you have experienced discrimination because of your ethnic affiliation, the community that you may reside in, or the color of your skin or heritage. When collecting their literature and how they intend to use it, they may be sympathetic to anti racist perspectives while being critical of writers who apologize for racist attitudes and behaviors. And an apology is not just saying sorry, it has a more of a philosophical connotation. And the word in Greek philosophy is actually called apologia. And this provides an excuse for poor attitudes and behaviors and tries to normalize them because of intent, and intent is misunderstood. And I'll tell you what they really mean. A current and repeated example is Trump. During the 2024 election presidential race, Trump made comments about developing countries and calling them shithole countries. A piece of recent news reported how Trump, when he was president, said that he would pay the funeral costs for a Mexican American soldier, Vanessa Guillen, because Vanessa Guillen was a soldier who was stationed at Fort Hood and was found murdered. When Guillen's family held the funeral at their for their daughter, they sent a $60,000 bill to Trump because, which I forgot to mention, and I'm sorry, because Guillen's family, or Vanessa's family, actually met with Trump, I believe, at the White House, and he offered that he would cover the funeral expenses. So then the family thought it was a very generous offer, and they accepted that offer. And then once they had the funeral services, they sent the bill to Donald Trump when he was in the White House, and he basically said, what I wrote here is that no Mexican is worth $60,000, don't pay it. All right, so then the Guillen family basically had to pay the $60,000 themselves. Right. And then what happened was that people that work for Trump or support Trump are make up excuses to justify his behavior. A similar issue just happened. Actually, the day that I wrote this was that Trump made a comment about Liz Cheney, who is a Republican, but Liz Cheney was working with Democrats to impeach Donald Trump when he was in office. All right. So then Trump made a comment about Liz Cheney being a super war hawk, and that if she's so into war, maybe she should go to battle or something to that effect, and that have maybe 9 guns pointed at her face, and then she would sort of think differently about war. But the way that he phrased it and explained it sounded that he was suggesting that Liz Cheney should be put in front of a firing squad and shot. So then a lot of his supporters, but mostly the ones who work with them, are saying, "Oh, well, that's not what he really meant." So they were giving him cover, or they were making excuses for Trump as to, by saying that, he misspoke, or that he wasn't very selective in his words, but he didn't really mean it. All right, so like that would be an example of an apology. All right, okay. So let me get back to this. So approaching this example from the perspective of Richard Paul and Linda Elder, this writer could be classified as a self-serving critical person, but would not be characterized as a fair-minded person, sort of referring to Trump. In a perfect world, in a perfect world, every writer would be a fair-minded critical person, but people have perspectives and unique ways of understanding their experiences and making sense of them. Academics do their best to be amicable, meaning friendly, but personalities make things antagonistic sometimes. For example, if a researcher is a Marxist and studies poverty in society, sorry about that. um, Studies poverty in society, Marx wrote that capitalism is a powerful system organized society, and the social classes that make up its economic and social relations. When the manuscript is finished and ready for review, there is a possibility that a reviewer could be more sympathetic towards capitalism and view it capitalism in a more positive. View capitalism as a positive force for society. Their assessment of the manuscript may be critical. There is nothing wrong with being critical, but critical has many positives. The question about criticism is, what function does the criticism fulfill? Meaning, when a researcher is offering a criticism of something that they read, it's one thing to be critical, right? And we should always be critical readers and engage in reading in the things that we read, right? But you could also look at something and then not like it just because of your political perspective or your political affiliations and so on and so forth. So it could be like a criticism could be a political one, it could be an issue of ideology, or even a theoretical and empirical issues. The number of questions is endless. One way to view this is to understand the context and how to describe and explain the characteristics of a context accurately. All right. So meaning this is what I mean by that. So for example, if your topic is about circles, you have to draw the characteristics of a circle. A circle comprises all points on a plane, meaning that it's all equal. They're not one further apart from the other. So they're relatively equidistant, the points, and then you could develop a circle from that. A circle combines the points on the plane, and the curve is equal to the center from the edge. So if you put a dot at the exact center of the circle, no matter what the distance you travel from the dot in the middle of the circle to the circumference's edge, it's all going to be equal, right? And just to sort of throw in a little geometry, a circle is like 360 degrees, right? So then the characteristics of a circle that you identify is what you would be writing about and how you would write about it. Because if a student instead, even though that they're talking about circles, and if a student discusses the characteristics of a square or a triangle, then the characteristics of the context are not the same. Because to discuss a square, you have to talk about like a equidistant square, and you have like 90-degree angles, and those are the characteristics of a square, which is not the same as discussing the circle. Same thing with the triangle, right? That would be, I think, 180 degrees, right? So you have to so that what I'm trying to have you think about, and what I'm pointing to, is that when you're looking at something and you're going to start discussing it, you have to understand what are the characteristics that you can identify. And once you identify them, how are you going to talk about them and then present them to your reader? Right. So that's pretty much what I'm trying to have you think about with this particular page. Okay. So now I'm going to go to the next page. So this one is more of a summary of Howard Becker's the Terrorized by the Literature, and this is just sort of providing a general overview of what he explains in the chapter. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, right? But if you notice, and I will write this out because when you're writing something, and then this actually goes back towards a lot of the comments that I making in the two written assignments, as well as the modules that I've gotten to earlier, is that when you're making a claim, you have to support it with some type of empirical evidence, and the empirical evidence can come from the text itself, right? So, like, for example, if you're saying something that the writer that was assigned to you did not provide a clear question or a clearly constructed hypothesis, that would be a legitimate critique of the writer's manuscript. Because what a question does, or a hypothesis, it sort of sets up what the argument and the thesis statement is going to be for your paper. Right. Or another criticism could be is that the writer is inconsistent in terms of how they use the evidence, or that they don't really use any evidence, is just pure speculation. And then I sort of made an argument, if I remember not too long ago in another video, is that sociology is the science of human activity. As such, we have to provide specific empirical evidence or empirical data to support the claims that we make. Right. So then parts of this module are encouraging you to react and to respond, and use empirical evidence from the readings to help support your claims. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. Excuse me. And that's pretty much what I'm having you do with this particular module, among other things, right? And then, okay, so then this, I'm going to stop it here, and then I'll continue with the other pages.